Unions, they're becoming a big part of our politics going into the fall parliamentary session. I've got Sean Speer, my co-founder and editor-at-large, joining us to break down some of the recent commentary in the Hub. Hey, Sean, how's it going?
Hey, great to connect, Roger.
We had some dueling op-eds today making the case for and against the Conservative Party embracing the labor movement to kind of create a new political coalition. Give us first the proverbial straw person argument for why the Conservatives are thinking about unions in a new way, in a way that potentially could have some political upside for them as they contemplate the risk of an election maybe as early as this spring.
Yeah, you'll recall, Rudyard, and some of our listeners and viewers will, that in his exclusive interview with the Hub, his first after the election, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre said, amongst other things, that a top priority for him moving forward would be about strengthening the party's relationship with labor unions. He even talked, you'll recall, about giving them a particular role at future party conventions. That, of course, is part of a bigger trend in Canadian politics whereby traditional working class voters, voters who the New Democratic Party used to be able to rely on, are increasingly shifting from the left to the right. That manifested itself in the most recent election where the Conservatives won some ridings, particularly in Northern Ontario, parts of the interior of BC, on the strength of working class voters that surprised a lot of people, that broke with historical convention. We've seen this, of course, also play out at the provincial level in Ontario, where the Working Families Coalition, a group of unions that had historically organized themselves to oppose the Progressive Conservative Party in elections, flipped in recent elections and actually endorsed Doug Ford and the PCs as part of this broader trend of what sometimes characterized as the realignment. And so based on those political developments, there are certainly those within the world of Canadian conservative politics who are looking at unions with a new or different light, seeing them less as opponents and more as potential sources of support and possible electoral gains. And that point of view was certainly reflected in one of the articles that we published today at the Hub.
Yeah. Before we get to the counter argument, in fact, you were the pen on the argument for why conservatives should be pro-worker but not necessarily pro-union. Let's talk a little bit about the NDP because, there's an argument, I think we at the Hub have been making it, that the last election would suggest the country is moving towards a two-party system. If that is indeed the case, and the NDP is headed for the proverbial, political knacker's yard of dead political parties and dead political movements, and it's a jump ball for labor, is there, forgetting the policy, the kind of the thinking behind pro or con union for, the Conservative Party of Canada, is there simply a kind of a tactical opportunity right now to strip from the NDP, a dying party, possibly its core support?
Yeah, that's a big part of the backdrop here. Some of our most astute listeners and viewers will know, Roger, that unions have been part of the NDP and its legacy party, the CCF, dating back to its origins. In fact, I still think it's the case that the NDP's constitution preserves particular slots or roles for the Canadian Labour Congress by virtue of being a party that grew out of the union movement. What we've seen, though, in the past decade or so is that the NDP's stronghold over unionized workers as a political category has declined. There are a lot of factors behind that, but I think the simplest way to understand it is that the NDP has become a party less focused on the material interests and needs of working class voters and more a party steeped in the interests and preferences of professional voters. And you don't have to take my word on that. You'll recall, Rudyard, one of the great honors that I've had at the Hub over the years is I interviewed Ed Broadbent before he passed away, the great NDP leader, who lamented this trend occurring with NDP politics, whereby it was less attentive to the interests of steel workers in Sault Ste. Marie or healthcare workers in Regina or whatever, and more so a party that reflected the tastes and preferences and attitudes of public sector workers or those in parts of the economy adjacent to the public sector. And it was his view that the party was kind of losing something from that. But the consequence is potential gains for the liberals and conservatives. And so I think you're precisely right that is a crucial part of understanding why this debate is even happening in conservative circles.
What would it mean to be pro-worker but not pro-union? I mean, how do you square that? I mean, how does one take unions out of the equation, given their historic role through collective bargaining and other union organized processes to try to extract higher wages, better working conditions? I mean, there is a long and you could say proud history, a record of accomplishment. Maybe not so much recently in terms of some of the things unions are funding today, but looking back through the decades, the gains of workers and the gains of unions, it's hard to decouple those two.
Well, this gets at the heart of my essay this morning that you were kind enough to mention, that is generally positive on conservative efforts to try to bring their ideas to bear to the interests of working class voters without necessarily seeing that as synonymous with the interests of unions in general and union leadership in particular. I think somewhat understandably, Rudyard, conservative politicians federally and at the provincial level, in an effort to try to appeal to working class voters, have sort of identified that the fastest route is to essentially doing some type of policy deal with unions and securing union endorsements. I think, for instance, in the province of Ontario, where the Ford government has certainly signaled, for instance, that it's prepared to revisit open tendering for construction projects in the name of currying favor with building trade unions. And the argument that I make is I think conservatives need to be careful about that. First of all, I think you can argue that those types of transactional arrangements with unions often come at the expense of conservative principles. That is to say, in order to get a deal with the union, you may make compromises on free enterprise or limited government or whatever. And I think they have to be at least mindful of those trade-offs. But then more fundamentally, I think there's an argument that the deals or the issues that are motivating union leaders may not be the ones that are motivating workers themselves. Sometimes those even within the unions, keeping in mind that there can be a gap between the interests or perspectives of union leadership and individual members. But then, of course, the large swath of Canadian workers who aren't unionized. Keep in mind that when you back out the private sector, union density within when you back out the public sector, rather, union density in the private sector is very low. Most Canadian workers, in fact, don't belong to unions. And so it's a long way of saying I think it's interesting and innovative that conservatives are thinking and talking about these issues. But I would encourage them to do it in a way that doesn't just default to doing deals with unions that I don't think are necessarily in the interest of kind of conservative ideas and may not even be in the interest of the workers that they're purporting to speak for.
Let's end with the ongoing saga around Air Canada and striking air attendants. We saw this weekend the union reject the latest wage offer. It will, however, go now to binding arbitration. That whole experience, Sean, saw an outpouring, I think, of public support for the air attendants, and interestingly, an early move by the Conservative Party to support the striking workers and to argue their case for higher wages and for compensation prior to their arriving on the plane and the plane departing, and their issues, I guess, of perceived work without pay, all to be, again, arbitrated now. What did that experience suggest about the politics right now of unions in Canada? And how do you think, what's your verdict on how the Conservative Party played that prominent strike?
I think it's a great question because it strikes at the heart of the conversation we're having. During the Harper era, of which I was a part, the conservative government in several instances used powers available to the federal labor minister to return striking unions back to work, and or directing the parties to binding arbitration. In this case, the conservatives were highly critical of the Carney government for taking those steps, siding with CUPE and the Air Canada flight attendants in a way that I suspect, Rudyard, was probably counterintuitive in the minds of a lot of Canadians. I've heard rumors that in the forthcoming fall parliamentary sitting, we may even see a Conservative member of Parliament bring forward a private member's bill that would amend the Canadian Labour Code, either eliminating the minister's power to direct binding arbitration or at least severely constraining it, which is, as I say, would be a major departure from the way the Conservatives have handled these issues in the past. I think it's all part of this broader effort to try to appeal to these voters in a world of a jump ball, as you put it. I just think that the prudence ought to be a kind of byword here. And yes, of course, the Conservatives will only win the next election if they're expanding their coalition. That part is good. But I think they have to be careful about doing it in a way that offends the ideas that they stand for and confuses the interests or preferences of union leaders and union members. If they can keep those factors in mind, Rudyard, then I think this is an interesting agenda and a time for a bit of new thinking and new ideas and a kind of new politics on the Canadian right.
Yeah, well said. My only contribution to this would be to try to kind of parse out a conservative response versus a populist response. I think, the populist response would be, I think, what we've seen here, partly in Ontario with the Ford government, at times with Trump, this kind of knee-jerk, catnip-like reaction to, understandably, some of the kind of energy and anger that comes out of the union movement today due to the affordability crisis, and how that then kind of connects back or wires back into issues where populist politicians want to be seen to be acting, want to be seen to be out there doing things on behalf of their potential voters, and unions and their demands in this kind of era of the affordability crisis, I think, have a kind of saliency that they haven't had in the past to politicians, and especially to populist politicians. So I think my concern for the conservative movement would be, to what extent is this a weather vane pointing as to where this movement is heading? Is it staying true to some kind of core conservative values around, the importance of markets and the freedom of exchange and labor, unhindered unnecessarily? Or is it getting tempted by the kind of populist kind of dog whistles that often come out of elements of organized labor, which again are very seductive to politicians who are trying to look like they're doing something for the so-called common man or common woman? Let's give you the last word.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant point, and precisely right. And I would say that the shortest path to this type of agenda may be seductive, as you say, but the longer path, the hard work of actually applying those ideas and principles to the issues that are concerning working class voters, is the best way to achieve a kind of durable expansion of the party's coalition. And so the example we spoke about on the roundtable on Friday, the Conservatives coming out and opposing the temporary foreign workers program, I think it's a great example. It's a kind of Overton window of, on one hand, wanting to appeal to these workers, on the other hand, wanting to bring their ideas and principles to bear. More of that, Rudyard, and fewer deals with union bosses, in my mind, is the kind of sweet spot for conservatives on these issues. Yeah,
competition reform, regulatory reform, these are the kind of things that can also address the so-called affordability crisis and give, working people a feeling that, they aren't drowning in a sea of rising costs. There's other ways to square the circle. Sean, thanks for coming on Hub Hits today. Always great to catch up.
Yeah, you bet, Rudyard. You too. Thanks so much.
Thank you for watching and listening to this edition of Hub Hits. This video has been brought to you by Airbnb. A big thank you to Airbnb for sponsoring the Hub's YouTube channel this month. It's great to be the beneficiaries of their support. Here at the Hub, we talk a lot about the housing crisis ongoing in the country. As we know, there are people out there that think that short-term rentals are to blame for taking supply off the market, but here at the Hub, we can feel that that doesn't make sense. Consider for a moment that the median number of nights an Airbnb is hosting someone in Canada as a guest is 55. These, frankly, aren't full-time rental properties. They are Canadians trying to get by like the rest of us by finding some additional income through renting out a property they own. Government data supports this. Statistics Canada recently reported the amount of Airbnbs that could actually be converted into long-term homes accounts for only 0.6% of Canada's housing stock. Canada needs solutions to tackle the whole housing market, not just 0.6% of it. We agree. Learn more at airbnb.ca/closer look.